Today, we're joined by Harper Bettis, who served for 11 years as a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer before being forced from military service because she is transgender. Today, she serves on the steering committee of the Las Vegas chapter of Veterans for Peace, helping build partnerships with local and national organizations working for peace and social justice. Thank you for joining us, Harper.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, yeah, it's great to be here with you on the Veterans for Peace Radio Hour and podcast. I know I first saw you last year at the Las Vegas VFP convention where you gave a talk. That was very eye-opening. And I guess since then you've joined up with the Las Vegas VFP chapter. So welcome to VFP. Glad to have you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. And the Las Vegas VFP chapter was kind of dormant at the time, but that conference really jump-started our ability to restart our chapter here and get involved in a lot of organizing.
Excellent. And I look forward to talking to you more about that and how that's been going. And yeah, I thought since we're recording during Pride Month, it would be a great opportunity to have a conversation that touches on your experiences, both as a veteran, being in the military, being an officer in the military, the development of your own identity and your transition into being a peace activist. All of that makes for a fascinating discussion. But I'd like to just sort of start with your beginnings, right? Your path into, first of all, let's talk about what got you into military service in the first place and some of your experiences as an Air Force officer.
Yeah, so I joined the military because my family always joined the military. It was my father did it, my grandparents did it. I really never thought that I would do anything else, and it was kind of a lifelong dream of mine to join the military. I think because I was raised with that idea that like that is a way for me to provide back or give back to my country, right? So like, hey, being grateful for the country that I live in, and what was drilled into me early on was that somebody has to fight for that, right? So it was given, like the way that the idea was given to me as a child and as growing up was, someone has to do this. This is an important piece of American life, is that somebody has to join the defense force. Somebody has to make sure that our rights and liberties are protected, right? So that was the initial, what brought me into the military, right? I think a lot of us can relate to this though. Like once you get in, it's less about that and it's more about the people that you serve with. Like you just learn to love those people. You go through a lot of really difficult things with them. You see some really awful things and you have to learn how to cope with that. And so what kept me in for so long was probably the love for the people that I served with. And maybe it was less about high ideals and it was more about the interpersonal connections between people.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so I wonder in terms of your own identity, and you didn't join the military as a trans person, right? You sort of transitioned after. So that must have been, I mean, I imagine that's just a difficult thing for anybody, but to do that while serving in the military, also as an officer, I think that kind of adds an interesting dynamic to that. How was that experience for you in the institutional military, but also among, those friends and comrades around you?
Yeah, that's right. So I sometimes I joke that I joined the military to prove that I was a man, but that didn't really work out. I always knew that I was different as a kid. I didn't really have any words for it because I grew up in a very conservative context where you just didn't talk about being LGBTQ. Like it was just the most heinous thing that you could be, right? So that was another like a dichotomy, if you will, of my identity. I was like, well, hey, I have to do something to kind of, if you will, get rid of this, identity. Is how I conceptualized it early on, right? But I think anybody who is queer knows that, hey, the more you press something down, the more you ignore something, like it comes up, right? And it comes up in other ways. So for me, it came up in, like I was a very angry person. I tried to bury that sadness in work, right? So I really leaned into my military job. I leaned into trying to just do my best to ignore it, but it comes back, right? So the military, when I joined, I started at the Air Force Academy in 2010. That was when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was still in effect. So you couldn't be openly gay, couldn't be openly lesbian, much less be trans. That was completely illegal at that time. It was almost like I was trying to put myself willingly into a place where, like, hey, you know what? You're not going to be allowed to do this thing, and that'll help me, if you will, get rid of it. I was at that time still struggling with wrestling with that identity with my religion and how that fit into my identity, right? Over time, though, like I came to realize, like, hey, I really can't ignore this. So I went to a lot of therapy, and I talked to some close friends, and they were all of them were military friends that were encouraged me and helped me figure out, like, hey, you can do this, you can be open about this. At the time I started talking about it, it was around 2018. So let me give you a little bit of history, if that's okay, of the history of trans service in the military. In 2015. President Obama issued an executive order that allowed being trans in the military. There was no system. It was just, hey, you're legally allowed to do this. The military at that time tried to figure it out. Like I knew about that, but at that time I was like, oh, I'm still not ready to come out. Like I hadn't done the work. I hadn't got to done the right therapy or had the right conversations with myself to be able to be open about who I was. But then in 2017, there was a pretty intense effort by the Trump administration to rescind that executive order. They couldn't quite get to it in the first Trump term. There just wasn't the political will. The legal structure was pretty shaky around it. So basically, what happened was they just made it very difficult to be trans in the military. They used a lot of administrative actions to slow down or stop people transitioning. And that's the way it was until President Biden got elected, or excuse me, got inaugurated in 2021. A few days after he was inaugurated, President Biden reinstated the Obama era policy, which was you're allowed to be trans in the military, and we're gonna rebuild essentially the system to make it safe, right? This is about the time for me that I was like, okay, maybe I feel safe enough to do this. Like I'm not going to risk my job and my career. But like at that time, even though, yes, it was legal to be trans, the military still had this really archaic view of what that meant. So while, medical science is pretty far forward on this, like, hey, if somebody says they're trans, you can just believe them, right? Of course, there's a lot of work that goes into this, and there's a lot of therapy, but the respect and dignity of just believing people are who they say they are, right? That's where medical science was at the time and still is now today. But the military takes a long time to catch up for things like that. So they make you go through a lot of therapy, a lot of tests that probably are pretty outdated, that are pretty old school in terms of trans healthcare. So even though I had decided, like, hey, I'm going to come out, I'm going to be myself, I'm going to openly transition in the military. It took me years of fighting that system just to be able to get the healthcare that I needed in order to do that. And that's when things were going, that's when things were going well. That's when the system was, quote unquote working, right? And then in 2025, of course, in January, when the second Trump administration came online, they immediately reinstated the ban. The reason was not that it cost too much, because it doesn't cost that much for the military. The reason was not that we're not deployable. There was multiple longitudinal studies with 10 or more years of data that says, hey, being trans, like trans people in the military, they don't really, doesn't slow things down. It's fine. Like the only issues that brought up by those studies were maybe the culture's not ready for it. That was kind of it, right? There was no legitimate reason to ban us other than what was stated in the executive order, which was that trans people, by their very nature, do not have the integrity to be in the military. That was it. That's the whole argument, right? So there's multiple court cases that are still ongoing now, a couple of years later, that are challenging this ban and that are trying to, like those court cases keep winning in the lower courts because the government really doesn't have a legitimate argument. Like their entire argument is these people are bad, trans people are bad people, which is objectively not true. So my journey through this is, I came out to some friends, like started talking about it and started trying to seek care in 2021. I didn't start getting medical care or transition, like allowed to transition until 2023. Almost all of my friends were very supportive, and nearly all of my peers were very supportive. Like there is always going to be friction, and this is something that a lot of queer folks, but especially trans people, can relate to. Like people know you one way for many years, and so it's hard for them to like mentally shift, to be like, oh, you're somebody different now. They use different pronouns, use a different name. So there was some friction, but I felt that for the most part, people engaged with me in good faith. And yeah, there were some mistakes, there's some roadblocks, but I no, for the most part, I was able to stand up for myself and say, hey guys, this is what my name is now. This is what my pronouns are now. And for the most part, people got on board with it, and that was like the negative reactions were the exception, if that makes sense. Like I rarely ran into that. Now that is a uh, fast forward to 2025 in January when the ban starts got instated, or excuse me, got reinstated. The systems and the structures that I thought I could rely on, so my chain of command, a lot of the medical, infrastructure, a lot of that stuff, I quickly realized that I couldn't rely on. They weren't here to defend me. They weren't here to defend my right to be here in the military. And then the most disappointing thing, though, was that many of my peers, when the ban happened, they never reached out to me. They never tried to help me. It was just absolute silence, right? Now, I say that was the people in my work center, those are the people in my chain of command. But the encouraging thing is people from all through my history in the military that maybe knew me well, maybe didn't know me that well. They reached out and said, "Hey, this is awful. Like, what's happening to you? Isn't fair. It shouldn't happen. We don't want this to happen." So, I think from my perspective, like the consensus among at least the people who knew me was this shouldn't be happening. Like, you deserve to be here, right? So of course, the military is not a democracy, but for the most part, I think that like American or the military is a representation of American culture. Most people are on board and supportive of trans people and do their best to, if pressed, would stand up for our rights, right? That didn't really help me in the military context. Like, there's nothing they can do about it. They just kind of have to stand by and watch, right? But I did have people that were trying to defend me, that were trying to give me more time to make decisions, that were trying to, if you will, give me support while that was happening. So yeah, that was my experience.